Hello, all you creepy crawlers, and welcome to the Blowing Smoke podcast. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. This episode that we're going to go ahead and talk about today is one of my favorite, Nintendo characters and game franchises, Mario. So light up and listen in. If you want to talk about Mario, you have to talk about the company that created the Mario franchise, the powerhouse brand Nintendo. Nintendo is a great example of an innocent brand. And innocent brands are typically, brands that have positive personalities and exude wholesome values, and they're all about bringing people together. So Nintendo is often credited with saving the video game industry in 1985 when it released the Nintendo Entertainment System. And of course, there's the fact that Nintendo has created 12 different home and handheld consoles over a course of more than 30 years and have sold over 10 million units. This includes the Wii, the Switch, the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, GameCube, Wii U, Nintendo DS, 3DS, Game Boy, and Game Boy Advance. Mario alone, the franchise, their games have sold over 750 million copies collectively. So, just Super Mario 64 itself was a massive success, selling over 11 million copies by the year 2003. And that makes, the game an emblem of the fifth generation era of video game consoles, which is basically when games first went 3D. And that was defined by the PlayStation, the Nintendo 64, and the Sega Saturn. That's one hell of a resume. And it explains how Mario has become such a part of video game culture. And you can find most of that information actually on Weirdmarketingtales.com. Between the home and handheld consoles and the successful franchises, Nintendo has been highly consistent with their branding and their essential Nintendo-ness that is impossible to copy. But as the Mario conspiracy theories show, it's not impossible to corrupt this sense of innocence to create horror. But, we'll get to that in a bit. When anything gets old enough, it starts to show signs of its age, and video games are no exception. The simple truth is that the early 3D games were glitchy. Even the best developers in the world had no playbook for creating games in 3 dimensions, and it showed. But as time goes on, gamers stopped seeing these glitches as annoyances and started seeing them as opportunities to be exploited. And let me tell you, friend, Super Mario 64 is glitchy. It's these very glitches that explain why the game has really stayed in the public eye for, over 25 years. And, it's the game's flaws that have kept it alive, really, through the practice of speedrunning. And, quick explanation of speedrunning. If you don't know what speedrunning is, the idea of speedrunning is that you play through either the entire video game or just part of it with the intent to complete it as quickly as possible. And this may not entail exploiting weird glitches to shave precious seconds off your completion time. Now, if you play Super Mario 64 the way it was intended, you're supposed to collect 70 of the 120 power stars in the game in order to be able to fight Bowser for a third time and rescue Princess Peach. Of course, many individuals have found ways to exploit these glitches that allow you to basically complete the game with just under 16 stars, 1 stars, or even none. And yes, the Mario 64 conspiracies can be very silly, and I don't think most people are taking them seriously. But let's take a little closer look at the conspiracies themselves. Big Boo's unused text. So somewhere buried in the game's source code, Big Boo never utters the line that the developers actually wrote for him, which is, "Please walk quietly in the hallway." There is, in fact, a sign that says, "Please walk quietly in the hallway," that seems kind of out of place and doesn't have much function. It's on the second floor of the castle, attached to the stairwell that takes you to the third floor. It's an oddity. Wario apparition. So some of these conspiracies are kind of just twisted facts taken out of context. The Wario apparition was mentioned. It's on the second to bottom section of an iceberg reference and some footage ripped from an E3 convention. And it should be noticed that Wario's floating head was actually applied to it on top of an actual portion of the game. So it's really not really a conspiracy. It's not real. wet, dry world, negative emotion aura. So this is another twisted fact taken out of context. The level Wet Dry World is one of the stranger ones in 64. It's a water level with some fairly annoying puzzles, which make it very unenjoyable. For others, they enjoy it, but I don't. The level overall design is just weird. It has a real blurred photograph of the city in the far background. The soundtrack is all minor key. And, there's an entire abandoned city under the main level of the odd church-like structure in the center. There's nothing really mystical about it. It's just a level with some weird design choices and, further exacerbated by the sparse details that, late 1990 video games had. Hazy Maze Cave is actually the castle's septic system. So this one is a more bizarre theory that is pretty simple enough to explain. That Hazy Maze Cave is dark. It's got some gross stuff. What appears to be like pools of oil. It features spiders, rolling brown rocks, and sticky yellow haze that slowly depletes your life. You get where I'm going. It's just plain old gross out humor. Now let's go ahead and talk about the Mario creepypasta, okay? To understand why Mario conspiracy theories were able to even spread, you have to understand creepypastas. So people used to sit around telling, ghost stories around the campfire. It's an important fact here that creepypastas are horror stories and urban legends that are online. It's like the same thing. Creepypasta has a way of subverting the 1990s nostalgia into extremely online horror. Mario 64 is not the first innocent video game to be reimagined as a horror story. That title goes to The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask with Ben Drowned, which is an excellent example of creepypasta. It's a story that was published online about a haunted cartridge previously owned by Ben, a 12-year-old who drowned. Legend has it that his spirit was haunting the old game's cartridge, causing all kinds of unsettling glitches, among other things. This story went on to be massively popular. Now, some of the creepypastas out there are quite cheesy, but, they're still crudely effective at being scary and a nostalgia for those collective, scary stories. Now, at this point, I should say that creepypasta doesn't just confine itself to twisting video games. Creepypastas are a thriving culture, an entity in its own right. It just so happens to, it collided with video games. In short, it's an art form, and its goal is to make you think and feel. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read the Super Mario 64 creepypasta Damned, and that's from Gage's famous creepypasta fandom. I could never in my wildest nightmares have ever imagined the horrors that could plague even the most simplest of life's enjoyments. The darkness that could invade any world, whether it was real or fictional. It all started the day me and my girlfriend were, talking about video games we used to play growing up. The games we used to enjoy. And over the years of my childhood, I have collected several games pertaining to several different consoles. But we both found the topic of the Nintendo 64 to be the most fun. So that day we decided to pick up one from my uncle's video game store and perhaps even pick up one of the greatest Nintendo 64 titles, Mario 64. Now when we got there, it took some time and a lot of browsing. But we were able to find the game after about an hour or so in several bins that he had placed throughout the store, literally the only copy he had. And it was there. As well as that, we found a Nintendo 64, the last one that he had in stock, ironically. The best part about it, he gave it to us for free. He told me that it had been brought and returned nearly 15 times since it came into his possession, and now he was just kind of looking to get rid of it. He also told me that, ironically, the game was always returned with it as well, and they always seemed to be brought together. He had heard that something was wrong with one or the other, and that some people even went as far as to tell him that it was evil and made of hell, things like that. Seeing how he only heard the story from 3 out of 15 customers, I brushed it off. And I just thought some hysterical story told by some people who decided they simply didn't want to keep the system. An excuse, if you will. And gave him $20 for the Mario 64. And the cheap jerk gave me like the 64 for free though, but the game was like $20. We went back home after being gone for about an hour and a half. When I got home, I laid the system in my living room and started to rummage through old boxes where I kept all sorts of old games, ranging from classic Atari games to the even popular Dreamcast. It was actually sort of strange because in these boxes I found that I owned every major console except for the 64. Well, until now, anyways. I pulled out my box with all of the Nintendo 64 games in it and I began digging through. I found games like, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, as well as its sequel Majora's Mask, and 2 Castlevania titles for the system itself, Castlevania 64 and Legacy of Darkness, and then so on. Just more games, and it was just time to hook it up. After everything was set up, my girlfriend decided that she wanted to put in Mario 64 first, and after some effort, the game was ready to go. "It's me, Mario," called out in its upbeat pitch. My girlfriend decided to mess with the Mario's face a bit before finally pressing start on her purple controller, and the screen transitioned to a file select screen. There are some files already on the game. In fact, all 4 slots were filled, each having just started the game because there was no stars on any of the files. So we just started deleting them. After we deleted file 1, however, the game froze, and then there was a deafening screech coming across our TV speakers. And it sounded almost as if somebody was screaming from the game itself. My girlfriend turned off the system after about 5 seconds. After a moment or so, she flipped it back on and we went back to the file select screen. Strangely enough, the file that we just deleted, which is file 1, was back. And this time it had 66 stars, even though previously it had none. So once more, she deleted again and it made that loud screeching sound. And this time I swear that it was louder than before. To the point where we both fell back while covering our ears. As I was closer to the plug than the system, I just jerked it out of the wall. This time, before we bothered trying again, I took the game out of the system and took it into the kitchen. Turns out that it was really dusty, which explained, at least to me, why the game was, reacting the way it was. Although it was still weird. After cleaning it up with a Q-tip, I took it back to the living room. I handed it to her. She plugged the console back into the wall, and we were ready to go. By now, it was getting dark. There was no light in the room, and we couldn't even plug in our lamp because the TV system and the game system took up the outlet. So we were forced to play in the dark. For me, something didn't feel right because for some reason, I was filled with a sense of nervousness that I could not quite explain. But you know what? I just shook it off and turned on the system. We were back to the file select screen. Each file was there previously, was gone, except for the first file, file 1. So we just started a new game on file 1, and the screen lagged. Like there was a CD, like it was a CD or something. But then after about a minute, it started up normally. We got to the opening scene with Peach inviting Mario to the castle, and the camera, as usual, followed up by pathway to the giant green pipe, which Mario leaps out of. She was in control of the game and took Mario directly into the castle. When she opened up the door to the castle, there was a prolonged pause, which made me kind of nervous. Once again, the loud screeching that ruined our game previously shot through our ears, and it felt like glass was jabbed into my eardrums. We were both overwhelmed because the terrible screaming that could not, and we couldn't even reach the plug. After about 30 seconds, it stopped, and we looked at the TV. Mario had somehow found his way into Big Boo's haunt. Like, this isn't supposed to happen. And it was weird. I thought, what the hell? Big Boo's haunt. It loomed over Mario's head ominously. So, it took my girlfriend a minute to process and what was going on. So I took the controller now and took a good look at the mansion itself. It was nothing like what it was supposed to be. It had castle-like features, actually, and was covered totally in blood and rust. The sky had black and red colors about it, complemented by the black clouds that seemed to pass by in an instant. I noticed that there's a new tower now, coming out of the mansion. And upon getting a good look, as I noticed several figures hanging from it, the whole screen faded to white, like it does in the entrance room when you look up at the sky and you go into the world where you obtain the wing cap. When Mario reappeared, he had somehow made it on top of the tower on a platform that went all the way around. The sky had a gloomy look to it, each cloud passing by the tower as dark as the night sky, and lightning began to rule and illuminate the clouds in its thunderous wake. I tried for the first time to move Mario forward, but a bolt of lightning stopped any movement that I was willing to make at that moment. I dropped the controller and my heart began to race. I didn't know what to expect, and I could see by the look in my girlfriend's eyes that a strong sense of paranoia had overcome her, because I constantly noticed her looking back behind us in the shadows that covered the room. With hesitation, I took the controller in hand and moved Mario forward about a foot or so before something fell from the top of the screen and the camera zoomed in on it. It was a depiction of Mario with a noose around his neck. We both yelled out and I dropped the controller on the floor. I moved back as quickly as possible. Mario's clothes were ripped all over, exposing several parts of his body. Underneath the clothes, we could make out stab wounds from either a knife or a dagger, which, more than likely caused all that blood splatter all over his skin and remaining clothing. But the most grotesque part of the image were his eyelids and mouth sewn shut, with blood trickling down his cheeks and chin. I was appalled by the gruesome sight. My heart was racing, and I would swear to this day that at that moment, that dead Mario fell from the top of that screen, that I heard something run into my bedroom. All of the hung figures were of Mario, all exactly the same, with eyelids and mouth sewn shut and stab wounds all over their bodies. I worked up enough courage, as much as I could muster. Again, I unplugged the Nintendo 64, which turned off, but not at that instant. Before the TV screen went black, the hung Mario's face underneath his sewn lips was smirking at us. I didn't want to get up, not even to turn on the lights. I wanted to remain in the exact spot, sitting down, because at least there I felt somewhat safe. But for my girlfriend's sake, I plunged in plugged in the lamp and lit the room up. Everything was peaceful, perhaps calm after the storm, and I took a deep breath and sat back down. I couldn't get that image out of my head, that smirk. I felt powerless as to what my mind wanted, why my mind wanted to remain on it. I sat on the floor next to my girlfriend and hugged her, picked her up, and took her to bed. Who the hell would make a game like that? It had to be the game. It had to be hacked. It's the only thing that made any sense to me. What I saw in that game, I would define as evil in its sickest form. Without a word between us, we laid in bed for what felt like hours before one of us finally broke the silence. She told me that she wanted to get rid of the game as soon as possible. As it was already late, I decided that it would be best to wait until tomorrow, because I was sure that my uncle's store was closed and GameStop didn't take games that old. So we just stayed in bed and agreed that we would not play the game again. But I couldn't get it out of my head. Still, I wanted to know why or how this was done. My curiosity got the better of me in the end, and after she had fallen asleep, I quietly got out of bed, went back to the living room, and plugged in the Nintendo 64. And it didn't turn on. Didn't have to. The game started itself. And not only that, picked up exactly where it left off. I was astounded by this because I had never seen a Nintendo 64 do anything like that. Right then and there, I knew that there was more to this. That I knew, and I had to know, what? I was fascinated. Drawn in, perhaps. I got a good look around the tower, despite being disgusted. I was morbidly fascinated by the entire scene. The paranoia it could convey was intriguing. After a few minutes of looking around, I pressed the pause button, and again, the screen faded, this time to black. It took me all the way back to the file select screen, and I found myself with more questions than answers. All the files were back again. File 1 had 66 stars, while files 2, 3, and 4 had none. I tried to remember back when we picked the file, and I was certain that they weren't there before. I tried loading file 4 first, and in response, the game showed me a picture of Mario dead in a pool of his own blood, with his eyeballs and entrails hanging out. After a shudder, it allowed me to hit B to go back. I tried loading file 3, and again I got another appalling picture. It was Mario once again, staring directly into the screen with bloodshot eyes that looked so close to real that I really thought they were. His mouth was gaping open and his tongue missing. Well, it was missing from his mouth at least. I examined further and realized that Mario's tongue was wrapped around his throat and that he was being strangled by it. I heard a chuckle of sorts, not from the game, but it sounded like it was directly behind me. I ignored it against my better judgment. I tried to start up file 2 now, and the game began to play. Mario was strapped down on a table in a decrepit version of the castle's entrance hall. The stones were all black, blood oozing from the cracks between each of them. Curtains that hung from the ceiling were tattered and falling apart. They appeared to be worn from the years. In the background, Peach and Toadstool were strapped to both sides of the door that lead to the basement area. Toadstool had the mushroom on his head torn off. I could make out his skull showing through the still fresh wound. He was obviously dead. Peach sent me into a state of awe. Her skin had peeled off, and I could see fully formed her head, which remained untouched. Good grief, I said silently as the video continued. Mario struggled for freedom as the door upstairs opened and a black mass slowly came through. Its footsteps solemnly echoed through the silent hall. The curtains on the ceiling blew casually to its passing as it moved down the steps towards him. Mario pulled and found no way to escape the situation that he had found himself in, and in response he began to beg for his life and pray. The black mass inched ever closer to the hero. It seemed, though, Mario gave up. The black mass walked around the table and stopped directly in front of Mario. Again, the hero begged and pleaded for his life. He told the black mass that he would do anything, only spare him for any crime that he committed against it. I saw a tear roll down Mario's cheek, and he closed his eyes tightly. A rope tied around his neck. He gagged and took in only heavy breaths. I couldn't see a hand so much that touched the rope, or where it even came from, but it indeed was there, with just enough slack so that Mario could breathe. Deep lacerations cut through Mario's clothes, and blood by the gallons covered him in a crimson pool. He screamed, begged, pleaded, asked for death. But it was not given to him. Not yet, anyways. The cuts continued until the floor was covered in a dark, dark red liquid exuding slowly across the floor. There is a deep silence, and only Mario's gasps of misery filled the room. Before I could so much think on what I had just seen with my eyes, I had just seen his eyes and mouth were forced shut. And I could see it for myself, a black needle going through both his eyelids and his mouth simultaneously, effectively silencing him, other than his muffled screams. Even more blood came from the fresh wounds and covered up his face. The rope tightened around Mario's neck, although he made no effort to escape. It was over. After a few short grunts, Mario was silent altogether, with not so much of a breath or movement. His face was terror personified. And even though this is a video game, the pain one would have to endure, the torture, my goodness. Again, before the screen faded to black, that Mario smirked at me. I sat in silence. The title screen with Mario's head came up on the TV. Only it wasn't the same Mario. The background was all black, and Mario was the same Mario from the scene that I had just watched, and he still had that smirk on his face. After much debate, I decided to keep going. I went to the file screen, and with all the courage that my heart could muster, I loaded file 1, 66 stars. The game loaded to a demonic laugh and a black sky filled with blood-red clouds. Repeatedly, I could hear a dark, brooding voice saying, "Game over." Like Mario would after you lost all of your lives. The Mario that I was controlling was the same Mario that I had seen killed and on the title screen. Screams, torments, bodies littered the pathways to the castle. The bodies of Peach, several Toads, and at the end, a dead Bowser, whose head was missing and whose body was impaled on a pike right above the bridge. I entered the castle and found myself back at Big Boo's haunt. I didn't question it anymore. I just went with it. The scene had not changed, not even slightly. And ignoring all of the graphic details, I entered the mansion to what I was sure would strike my heart in some way, shape, or form as pure terror. I could feel something circling and closing around me. I ignored it. I had to. I needed to know what this was or what was going on. Something whispered in my ear and I was sure of it. I gulped as the screen transitioned to the entrance hall of Big Boo's haunt. The room with all the doors. The bodies of faceless Marios hung all over the ceiling, illuminated only by torches. I could feel sweat trickling down the back of my neck, and I saw a standalone figure all the way in the upper corner balcony. I moved Mario slowly towards it. I was afraid. I was more than willing to admit that, and never been more afraid in my life. I jumped up the steps one at a time, moving cautiously and carefully. It was another hung man, that was for certain. But who was it? I'll never forget. As I reached the body, I hesitated, but zoomed in on it. I began to tremble, my hands barely holding the controller. The figure was indeed a man hung by a rope. That man had his eyes and mouth sewn shut, just like Mario, and was bleeding profusely from his eye sockets. That man, in all his pain, that was me. He let out a scream, something haunting and bone-chilling. A wail like nothing that I have ever heard. The screen began to flicker and turn static. I tried to turn off the system. I tried to unplug it, and nothing worked. The TV wouldn't even turn off. I saw my corpse through the static burning. As its haunting wail had yet to cease, Mario turned his head 180 degrees and looked directly at the screen. And with that smirk on his face, he let out a wail just like I did. My head began to hurt and throb. I fell to the floor, and the last thing that I remember from that night was seeing a black mass hovering over me. Alright, that was the creepypasta for Mario 64, which is Damned, and you can find that on Gage's famous creepypasta fandom page if you want to look it up yourself. And I'm sure there's probably more creepypastas on there if you really wanted to look into it. Okay, so let's get back to the Mario conspiracies. Now, this is from culturefly.com, and it's 10 Mario conspiracies that you won't believe. So let's start with number 1. All the world's a stage, especially Super Mario Bros. 3. So this one, they're saying that Super Mario 3 is actually a stage play. And in fact, it very well, I think it was proven fact that it was. Reason why that people think that this theory is real. The curtain rises. Do you remember how Super Mario Bros. 3 starts? Well, it began with a closed red stage curtain, and then it is lifted to start the show. Thrown together sets, look at the backgrounds of the world that Mario is adventuring through, and you will see something strange. They all appear hastily built, almost temporary. Platforms have visible screws bolting them in. Many objects cast shadows on the sky behind them. One could argue that the whole thing looks more like a set than a world. Hanging platforms. Many of the platforms are shown hanging, supported by cables that seem to drop from the heavens. Any crew member can tell you that if you look up in a theater, you'll see a large grid that would possibly, you could hang things from. You go outside, there's no grid in the sky like that. So, exit to the wings. As each level ends, Mario finishes by exiting into a black void separated from the rest of the world. It's almost like the end of a set, with Mario exiting into the wings. This was confirmed later, by Miyamoto in 2015, I believe, on Twitter. So it's theory, but a proven theory. Let's go with number 2. Mario is the real evil. So Mario is a hero trying to thwart Bowser and his evil plans, right? So one game theory from fans flips challenges that we would think, or that we know, claiming that Mario isn't actually really the lovable character that we think he is, but a power-hungry maniac rampaging through the Mushroom Kingdom. So what is the evidence of this theory? The bad guys juggle hammers. What exactly are, the bad guys in Super Mario Brothers actually doing? The Goombas are just walking around. The Hammer Buddies seem to be just juggling or playing catch. No one seems to be interested in Mario at all until he comes along and jumps on their freaking heads. So who's the real aggressor? Mario is a world destroyer. If the Koopas aren't bad, then how can we justify what Mario does to them? He steals their coins, wrecks their castles, and deposes their king. Looking at things from their perspective, maybe they should be throwing hammers at him. The hero is no friend to mushrooms, okay? So you're probably figuring that Mario is doing this all on behalf of the mushroom people to get the princess back. The Koopas attack them, and he's their ally. But there's one small hitch here. In the instructions to the first game, it says that part of the Koopas' magic turned the mushroom people into stone and bricks. Yes, bricks. Like the hundreds of bricks that Mario destroys during the game. Could those have been the mushroom people all along, and he's literally destroying them by smacking his head on it and breaking them up? Number 3. Princess Peach is behind it all. So we know that Princess Peach and her role in the Mario franchise is basically the damsel in distress. She's always getting picked up and kidnapped and stuff like that. But does she actually need him? Take a look. Just think for a second. We only hear one side of the story. Bowser has his own kingdom. What does he want with the Mushroom Kingdom? We're told that Bowser and King Koopa invade, but we're never given the reason why. We only hear Peach's side of things, and yet we're supposed to believe that's all there is. Peach has power. Peach is kidnapped by Bowser, right? And maybe the story goes, but it's very vague. As we learn later in later games, Peach is a formidable force in her own right. So how does she keep getting kidnapped, right? Perhaps she's allowing it to happen to achieve her own goals. Peach could have ulterior motives. Why would Peach let herself be kidnapped? Well, maybe she sees the bigger picture. Maybe it appears as though that she wants to get kidnapped, and she pits Bowser and Mario against each other and lets Mario do all the dirty work of taking out most of her enemies, leaving a power vacuum that Peach will then fill. She's been the evil genius all along. Number 4. Dr. Mario lost at birth. So there's a lot of heavy theories that Dr. Mario is actually one of the Mario brothers, like the third lost Mario brother. And the evidence is pretty simple. They both appear in one game. Both characters appear in Super Smash Bros. Melee. A tough trick if they're the same guy, right? They look different. Dr. Mario is a little paunchier than Mario and sports lighter hair. Where'd the doctor come from? Mario never shows any medical skills during the main game. Wouldn't these come in handy while fighting Koopa? You know, better than plumbing skills at least. Mario, Luigi, and Dr. Mario. It's a fun theory. But no matter how many times Mario and Luigi save the kingdom, you can still bet that their family still brags about the doctor brother more. Okay, number 5, Wario. Just a misunderstood fan. This one's kind of funny to me. So, while the official backstory of Wario is in the instructions of Super Mario Land 2, and it deems Wario as a arch rival who has been jealous of our favorite plumber since childhood, maybe that's just misunderstood fandom. The facts to support this are, keeping your enemy's statue. If Wario hates Mario so much, why does he have a huge statue of him at his estate when we see, like the one we see in Super Mario Land 2? It is stated that this used to be Mario's castle, and that Wario chose to keep the statue. That sounds more like the behavior of a fan than an arch rival. The outfit. If imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, well, look no further than Wario's fashion sense. The colors may be different, but the overalls, the hat, the mustache look pretty familiar there, huh? Future games will feature Wario on his own adventures and introduce us to his brother, or so-called brother, Waluigi. It's like he's trying to recreate Mario's life. Sounds like Wario doesn't need to be defeated so much as he needs to find a good therapist to help him get over his hero worship, right? Okay, so now on to my favorite Mario conspiracy theories. The Legend of Peach. So, we've mentioned that the Mario stories are basically the same, right? Mario is a plumber and he is looking to go free the princess from Bowser, right? But have you ever noticed that the Zelda games also follow the same basic template that we just outlined? What if Mario and Zelda were both telling the same exact story, with variations, over and over again? Zelda came first. The theory goes that the story was warped into what we know as Mario as the centuries pass, and that the medieval setting of Zelda became dimmer and dimmer in memory, and Mario became Link, Zelda became Peach, Ganon the pig demon became Bowser, and, etc. That's one of my favorite theories. There's also Yoshi, the lost Pokemon. So there's another connection fans have made between the two different games. Yoshi, it turns out, is actually a lost variety of Pokemon. Yeah, I know, this sounds funny, right? But think about it. Yoshi comes out of an egg which looks literally identical to a Pokemon egg. Obeys even unto the end of the individual who actually hatched them. Only speaks its own name. And even has special moves and powers like a Pokemon does. Nintendo likes to have Easter eggy crossovers a lot. So there's some plausibility that, Yoshi could be a lost Pokemon. Okay. There's also Waluigi is possibly another lost brother. It's an alternative theory to the Dr. Mario one, basically. Waluigi, right? That guy. The one they never let into any main game series, so he has to hang out in the spin-offs. That reject. The rumor goes that Waluigi is such a weird oddball that he'd become rejected by his more camera-friendly siblings and is left to wallow on the sidelines, slowly becoming more insane. Which is freaking hilarious. And the last one is Mama Peach. So there's a dark secret that almost got, slipped out basically in Mario Sunshine, but it was covered up. That Peach had a kid with Bowser one of the times that she was stolen or kidnapped or whatever you want to call it. Who else really is a possible candidate to be like Bowser Jr.'s mommy? It totally happened. Bowser has even told Junior this, apparently. Sure, he went back on it, but, what else are you going to tell your kid after such a horrible rejection by their mom? Who wouldn't even, publicly acknowledge him, right? Might as well give him a chance to move on with his life. So, I've really enjoyed sharing these conspiracy theories with you. Leave a comment on your own conspiracy theory or about the episode itself, and feedback is always welcome. So, on to the message of the day. Here's your message. All guys should learn from Mario. No matter how far their princess is, they should go after her. We'll let that sink in. So that does it for me. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next episode, okay? Stay creepy like Kimiko Kusanagi. Bye!